The first sound wasn't the crying. It was the scrape of metal against wood, the echo of a breakfast tray landing in front of her. Greta Möller looked down. Something brown and stringy filled half the plate, tangled, crisp, uneven. Next to it lay a pale yellow fold that shimmered with melted butter. The smell was heavy with oil and smoke. She stared at it like it might be a test. Behind her, the line of women moved forward in silence, the gray fabric of their uniforms blending into a wall of ghosts. Prisoners of war, German women, forgotten and shipped across the ocean to a camp in Texas that smelled like sunshine and frying food. Greta's voice trembled in German. "What is this?" The soldier behind the counter grinned. Freckles, no helmet, eyes the color of summer wheat. "That's Hashbrowns and Omelette, ma'am," he said cheerfully, unaware that every word of English landed on her like Morse code. Hash, browns, omelette. She didn't know those words. The brown part looked like straw. Burned straw. She'd eaten straw before, soaked it in turnip water to keep her stomach from twisting during the last winter of the war. The guard nodded at the plate as if that explained everything. "Best breakfast in Texas," he added. Her hands felt weightless on the tray. The warmth seeped through the tin into her skin, and for one strange, dizzy moment, she thought about her mother's kitchen. Before the air raids, before the smoke, before the world split apart. The mess hall buzzed with whispers. "What is this food? Is it safe? They'll laugh when we eat it." No one picked up a fork at first, then Greta sat down. The table was smooth pine, polished, not the rough splinters of barrack benches she was used to. Sunlight pushed through the windows in long stripes, dust dancing in it. Outside, someone was playing music, a tune so soft and strange she couldn't tell if it was joyful or sad. She stabbed the brown strings. They broke easily, flaking apart under the fork. Steam rose, not the stench of boiled cabbage, but something rich and warm. She lifted a bite to her mouth. The taste stopped her cold, crisp, salty, real, not rations, not roots, real potatoes, fried in oil, seasoned, cooked with care. Her body didn't know how to accept it. Her throat closed before the second bite. The next sound was a sob, low, raw, pulled from somewhere deep that war hadn't managed to burn out of her. Then another. And another. By the time she dropped her fork, the tears were falling freely. Silent at first, then shaking through her shoulders. Her breath came uneven, broken by sound. The chatter around her died instantly. 200 women, all hollowed by years of cold and hunger, watched one of their own unravel over breakfast. The young guard froze. "Ma'am?" he said softly, unsure whether to approach. Another man stepped forward, taller, darker, with a calm that filled the space between chaos and kindness. His name tag read Davis. His apron was dusted in flour and salt. He leaned down beside her table. "Something wrong with the food?" Greta blinked through tears. Her voice cracked. "It's potatoes." Davis hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. Fried fresh this morning." She looked up, trembling. "Fresh." The word scraped out of her like it had never belonged to her language. Davis saw her shaking and did something no one expected. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded white cloth and placed it beside her hand. A handkerchief, clean pressed, smelling faintly of soap. "Here," he said gently. Greta stared at it, not believing. In her world, kindness had always come with a price. But this man, an American, a soldier, a stranger, had offered her something soft for no reason at all. She wiped her face with trembling hands. Around the room, the same scene repeated in slow motion. A dozen women began to cry. Then 20. Then 50, no orders, no speeches. No one told them what to feel. They just cried. For their mothers, for their brothers, for the years they'd traded for survival, and for the unbearable taste of mercy. The guards didn't stop them. They didn't shout or mock or threaten. They just stood there. Boys in olive uniforms looking helpless in the face of something they couldn't understand. Davis cleared his throat softly. "You ladies want seconds?" "We've got plenty." Plenty. The word cut through the air like a prayer. For years, everything in Germany had been less. Less food, less warmth, less hope. And now this stranger was telling them there was plenty. Greta looked at him, the corners of her mouth trembling. She couldn't speak. She only nodded. He smiled, took her tray, and came back with another helping. Golden, glistening, steaming. The smell filled the hall again, and for a heartbeat, it felt like home in a place that wasn't supposed to have one. She took the fork and ate slowly, tears still falling. Each bite felt like betrayal and forgiveness. The war, the hunger, the propaganda, all of it unraveled with every mouthful. Outside, the morning light spilled over the camp like melted gold. And inside, 200 women ate their first real breakfast in years, as if they were discovering for the first time that survival could taste like kindness. By noon, the smell of breakfast still lingered in the barracks. Butter, salt, and a faint sweetness she couldn't name. It clung to their hair and their clothes, reminding them that the morning hadn't been a dream. Greta sat on her bunk, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Around her, the other women were quiet. Not fearful quiet, but stunned quiet. That kind of silence that happens when the world shifts and no one yet dares to move. Across from her, Lotta brushed her hair with trembling fingers. "They'll take it back," she said softly. "It was too much. They'll realize the mistake." Greta didn't answer. She looked down at her hands, pale, thin, almost transparent. They didn't shake anymore. For the first time in months, they were steady. The door creaked open. The same young guard from breakfast peeked in. He looked almost embarrassed. "Ladies," he said carefully, lunch will be served in 20 minutes. Chicken stew today." Lotta frowned. "Stew?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied, hesitating at the word ma'am like he wasn't sure if it fit. "With biscuits." The word hung in the air like a foreign song. Biscuits. He cleared his throat. "Also," the sergeant said, "if anyone needs soap or extra blankets, just ask." Then he was gone. Lotta turned to Greta. "Blankets, soap, chicken." She laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "They think we are guests." Greta stood, straightening her uniform. "Maybe they think we are human." The mess hall was quieter this time. No one cried, not yet. The smell of chicken broth and fresh bread hit them before they even sat down. The black cook, Sergeant Davis, was there again, ladling stew into bowls. The steam rose around him like incense. He worked slowly, carefully, as if each serving was a promise he intended to keep. When Greta reached the counter, he looked up. "Afternoon, ma'am," she nodded stiffly. "Good day, Sergeant." The English felt heavy on her tongue, clumsy but alive. He handed her a bowl. The broth shimmered with bits of carrot and onion. Floating in it were thick chunks of chicken, actual meat, not scraps. The last time she'd tasted chicken was 1943, a wedding feast that ended with air raid sirens. Davis noticed the way she stared at it. "Ain't much," he said gently, "but it's hot and it's yours." She met his eyes then, dark, kind, steady. For a moment she didn't see a uniform or a guard or even an American. Just a man offering warmth to someone who'd forgotten what that meant. "Danke," she whispered. He didn't understand the word, but he smiled anyway. "You're welcome, ma'am." They ate in near silence again, but this time the silence wasn't shock, it was peace. The clatter of spoons and the quiet hum of chewing filled the space like a prayer. Halfway through the meal, someone laughed. It was small, nervous, but real. Heads turned toward the sound like it was forbidden. Then another laugh followed, short, sharp, relieved. Greta didn't laugh, but she smiled. For the first time in years, her jaw didn't hurt from clenching. That night, the barracks buzzed in low conversation. The women whispered like conspirators about the food, the camp, the guards. "I saw one of them polishing shoes," someone said. He whistled while he worked. They gave the sick nurse medicine. Real aspirin. They let me keep a comb. Each new detail chipped away at the stories they'd been told. That Americans were brutes, mongrels, animals in uniforms. Instead, they found men who smiled, who said please and thank you, who treated prisoners with something dangerously close to respect. Hunger had made them suspicious of everything, even kindness. But now they were starving for it. Greta couldn't sleep. The camp was quiet, the kind of stillness that feels like it's waiting for dawn. She lay awake staring at the ceiling boards, tracing the patterns of light from the guard tower outside. Her stomach was full. That alone felt wrong. She kept expecting guilt to follow, the kind she'd felt every time she'd eaten during the war while others starved. But no guilt came, just warmth. From outside came faint music, a radio again. A man's voice sang something in English, slow and deep. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It sounded like longing, and it made her think of home or what was left of it. The next morning, they lined up again for breakfast. This time, no one hesitated. They took their trays, said quiet thank yous in broken English, and found seats quickly. When Davis passed behind their table, Lotta leaned toward Greta. "He hums while he cooks," she whispered, smiling. Greta nodded. "Yes, like my father used to." It was a small thing, but it landed hard. The kind of small thing that starts to heal something large. After breakfast, Davis approached their table. "Ladies," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "we got a little extra sugar this week. Maybe make pancakes tomorrow." Greta blinked. Pancakes. She remembered the word from before the war, Sunday mornings, her mother flipping them in a cast-iron pan, the smell of butter filling the house. She met Davis's gaze and nodded. "That would be good," he smiled. "Then I'll save you some." Lotta nudged her. "He likes you." Greta rolled her eyes, but her cheeks flushed anyway. "He's kind." "Kindness is dangerous," Lotta murmured. Greta looked down at her hands, the faint stains of potato and oil still clinging to her nails. "No," she said softly. "It's the only thing that isn't." That night, before lights out, she found a piece of lined paper on her bunk, folded once, neat handwriting inside. "Tomorrow's pancakes. Extra butter if you like. J.D." She held the note for a long time before tucking it under her pillow. Outside, the Texas wind blew warm against the barrack walls, carrying with it the scent of something new. Safety. Greta closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't dream of bombs or hunger. She dreamed of breakfast. The next morning began with the smell of something sweet. It drifted through the barracks long before dawn, wrapping around the bunks like a secret. Greta woke to the soft scrape of spoons against metal and a murmur of voices outside. When she stepped into the cold corridor, she saw Sergeant Davis standing by the kitchen door, steam curling around him like smoke. "Morning, ma'am," he said with that same easy warmth. "Told you I'd make pancakes." He nodded toward the counter where a mountain of golden circles waited beside tins of butter and a jar of syrup that gleamed like amber. Greta hesitated, her hands gripping the tray. "You have syrup?" she asked, pronouncing the word carefully. Davis laughed. "Got plenty." That phrase again. It still didn't sound real. The pancakes were soft and sweet, heavier than air but lighter than bread. Each bite left a taste she couldn't name, something like memory and sugar and warmth. Around her, women smiled without meaning to, chewing slowly as if afraid the food might vanish. For the first time since their capture, laughter came without shame. It began small, just a single giggle from Lotta at the end of the table, and spread like fire in dry grass. Soon even Greta was smiling. Syrup running down her wrist, her heart doing something she hadn't felt in years. It beat lightly. It hoped. That night, a cold wind pressed against the barracks walls. Someone whispered it was Christmas Eve. The date didn't matter anymore, not really. But the sound of the word brought a hush that settled deep in their bones. Greta sat on her bunk and stared at the window. The glass was fogged, her reflection pale and ghostly. Across the room, Lotta hummed a carol under her breath, the tune fragile but recognizable. "Stille Nacht," she whispered. Silent night. Greta closed her eyes and joined in softly. Two voices filling the quiet. The door opened and the young guard, the one with freckles and awkward politeness, stepped inside carrying a cardboard box. "Merry Christmas, ladies," he said. He started handing out small foil-wrapped rectangles, one to each woman. The room froze. The foil caught the dim light, shimmering like treasure. Greta took hers gingerly. The wrapper crinkled between her fingers. "What is this?" she asked. "Chocolate," the guard said. "Courtesy of the United States Army." He grinned. "Don't worry, it's safe to eat. Chocolate." She hadn't heard the word in years. Not real chocolate. Not the gray bitter stuff they used to make from beetroot and lies. She peeled back the foil and the smell hit first. Sweet, creamy, rich. It was almost too much. Her eyes filled before the first bite. When she finally tasted it, the world stopped. The chocolate melted against her tongue, and for a moment she was a child again, standing in her mother's kitchen, sneaking sweets from a tin before supper. But this wasn't home. This was Texas, and the man who had handed it to her was supposed to be her enemy. Across the room, the same thing happened again and again. Women covering their mouths, trembling, crying. the air filled with quiet sobs and the sound of foil being unfolded like letters from the past. Lotta sat beside her, holding her piece between her fingers, staring. "It's real," she said softly. Greta nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes," the young guard watched, uncomfortable but gentle. He cleared his throat. "Merry Christmas, ma'am," he said again, softer this time, and left the room. The women didn't speak for a long while after he was gone. They just sat there, unwrapping small pieces of sweetness, rediscovering what joy tasted like. Later that night, Greta found herself standing outside, wrapped in her thin coat. The stars above the Texas sky looked endless, too many to count, too bright to believe. Snow didn't fall here. The air smelled of dry earth and pine smoke instead. She could hear faint music from the guardhouse, something jazzy and unfamiliar, and laughter drifting across the field. American laughter. She thought about the chocolate still melting on her tongue, about the boy who had given it away like it was nothing, about the word plenty. In Germany, that word had been a myth. Every speech, every broadcast, every command had promised sacrifice. To suffer was noble. To want was patriotic. But here even the cooks lived like kings. She looked at the barracks windows glowing softly behind her and thought of the women inside, soldiers, nurses, secretaries, crying over candy bars. It wasn't the sweetness that broke them. It was the ease, the careless abundance of a world that had never run out. When she returned inside, Lotta was still awake, staring at the small silver wrapper in her hand. "I will keep it," she said quietly. "For luck," Greta smiled faintly. "For memory." Lotta folded the wrapper carefully and slid it into her pocket. Same thing. That night no one sang carols. No one prayed. But there was a peace that filled the room anyway, heavier than sleep and softer than silence. Greta lay awake listening to the slow rhythm of breathing all around her. She thought of Sergeant Davis humming as he worked, the young guard blushing as he said "ma'am," and the taste of chocolate melting in her mouth. She thought of how strange it felt to be treated kindly by people she had been told were monsters. In the dark, her mind whispered a question she couldn't push away. If this was what defeat felt like, warmth, food, kindness, then what exactly had they been fighting for? The thought kept her awake long into the night, but it didn't hurt. It simply sat there, quiet and undeniable, like the taste of sweetness that refused to fade. They were invited to a town hall 2 nights later, a VFW gathering that smelled of polish and punch and something that felt dangerously like normal life. The bus ride into town felt unreal. The women pressed against the windows and watched Texas roll past in wide green flats and scattered homesteads, a world stitched together by fences and sky. For many of them, the idea of being escorted into an American social hall was the sort of story you tell children to make them believe in miracles. For Rosia Engel, who had worked radar in Hamburg and measured scarcity in kilojoules, it felt like stepping onto a different planet. The VFW hall was warm and loud, bright with paper streamers and a scratchy record on the phonograph. Betty Sue, with hair piled in victory curls and a dress the color of summer, greeted them like long-lost cousins. She pointed to a bathtub full of glass bottles tipped on ice, each one sweating cold beads down its neck. "Help yourselves," she said. And when Rosia saw the label, she didn't understand it at first because the shape of the bottle was simple and ordinary and lying to her. Coca-Cola, embossed in the glass like a brand of the future. Rosia's hands went numb. In Hamburg, one bottle of soda had been a sacred thing, a festival ration at a Christmas party before the blackout curtains. Here the bottles hummed with casual plenty. A young boy darted by, grabbed one with sticky fingers, drank straight from the neck, and ran off laughing. Rosia clutched the bottle as if it were a relic. The first sip knocked her back. Cold fizz, sugar sharp as a slap, the burn of carbonic that made her eyes water. She almost laughed and cried at once. The world inside the hall spun with a kind of cheerful disregard for scarcity she had never known. Around her, other women reacted in different ways. Hilda Kessler, practical and precise, turned the bottle in her hands and began doing arithmetic in her head. The cost of sugar, the allocation of cocoa, the grocery lines rationed by state edict. All of it unraveled into absurdity as she realized the Americans had ended sugar rationing months ago. She pressed the bottle to her forehead, feeling the cold glass, and the realization hit her like a wall. While they had starved to prove a point, an entire society had kept going and was now complaining about grocery queues. Margaret watched a man in a VFW jacket hand a young girl a bottle, and then pour her a second, smiling because he remembered being a kid who could afford impulse. The casualness of it, people buying soda for pleasure, not as a luxury, felt obscene and liberating. For the first time, she understood the scale of what they'd been told. Propaganda that painted the enemy as soft, as decadent, and therefore weak. The truth was stranger than the lie. This abundance had been sustained through war, and now it spilled into peacetime with a careless generosity that made the German women feel both cheated and dazzled. The dance began. Benny Goodman on the record, a clarinet weaving like a promise. Men and women took to the floor in nylon stockings that glittered under the hall lights. Nylon, a miracle fiber that had been turned into parachutes in Berlin and used for bullets of necessity, rather than the frivolous comfort of hosiery. A woman in a crisp dress lifted her skirt to show the seam and laughed. The German women stared as if the sight of nylon were a kind of small betrayal. Here were fabrics they'd only seen in propaganda pictures or envy, mass-produced and ordinary, making legs gleam in motion. Rosa watched a Texas couple glide by and felt a strange mix of desire and disbelief. She imagined that in a few years, if the maps and politics permitted, her children might grow up in a world where cola and nylon were simply things you ate and wore without excuse. The idea was almost painful in its simplicity. She thought of her sister in Hamburg pawning a silver spoon for a scrap of flour, and felt the weight of those choices in her chest. This wasn't just about sweets and stockings. It was proof that whole economies could function differently, that scarcity was not destiny but policy. A local man, a rancher with a slow grin, took a seat beside Hilda and offered her a piece of pecan pie. She hesitated, then took it, and the first bite made her eyes water with the same strange mix of grief and pleasure. He asked in slow German-tinged English where they had come from, and she found herself telling him in clipped phrases about Leipzig, about trains and black bread. He listened the way people listen to weather reports, not indifferent but without the needle of guilt. "You girls work in town," he said awkwardly. "We got jobs if you want 'em." The offer hung in the air like an impossible bridge. Margaret moved through the hall with a bottle cooling in her palm, and realized that each ordinary act, pouring a drink, polishing a shoe, handing out a paper cup, was a small demonstration of a system at scale. Factories, distribution, a civil life that kept humming. It didn't absolve the past. It simply made the past look less intentional and more tragic. They had been brought up to believe that the Americans were unrefined, that their comforts were shallow. Instead, comforts had been a layer of infrastructure, a set of choices that could be made durable even under stress. By the time the lights dimmed and the record wore thin, the German women had pockets full of small proofs: a warmed Coke bottle, a scrap of nylon thread cupped like a secret, a smear of pie on a cheek. They returned to the camp bus quieter than when they'd arrived, loaded into seats that creaked and hummed, the night air cool against their faces. The silence was not empty. It was full of the work of reconfiguring imagination. Every woman held a new fact against her ribs. Abundance was possible, people could be kind without calculation. The enemy might be mistaken for monsters when they were, in many cases, neighbors. Greta sat with her Coke between her knees and thought about the road home she would face in a few weeks. Checkpoints, rubble, relatives thinner than memories. She felt something loosen inside her that wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but a shift toward something else. A willingness to consider that the world could hold space for more than one truth. The bottle sweated in her hands as if it were alive, and she tucked it carefully into the small canvas bag they had given each prisoner on arrival. She would save it, she decided, like a talisman against the old stories. When they stepped down from the bus at camp, the camp lights looked softer than before, the barbed wire less menacing under the moon. The men at the gate waved tiredly, their silhouettes patient and ordinary. The women filed back to their bunks with pockets of evidence, their laughter small and private. That night, as a radio hummed another song on low, Greta thought of the boy who had served the pancakes with a grin, and the cook who had handed out seconds with no ledger. She thought of the man who had offered a job and the women who danced without worry. The war had ended, the maps had been redrawn, and somewhere between a bottle of soda and a pair of stockings, a different kind of future had begun to insinuate itself into their lives. The morning after the dance, a thin fog lay across Camp Swift like a blanket someone had forgotten to fold. Greta woke before dawn, her head full of music that wouldn't stop looping. A clarinet's soft trill, the sound of laughter, the fizz of Coca-Cola in glass. She lay still for a long time, staring at the wooden ceiling, and realized something had shifted inside her. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. It was something smaller, more fragile, like a thread being pulled loose from an old uniform. When she finally sat up, the barracks were quiet except for the soft creak of bunks. Lotta was still asleep, her hand curled around the edge of her blanket. The faint scent of soap lingered. Real soap, not the chalky blocks they used to scrub uniforms in the Wehrmacht hospitals. Greta pressed her face into the smell, just to remind herself it existed. Later that day, she was called to the administration office. The summons made her stomach twist. That word administration had never meant anything good. Inside, she found Corporal Julius Winterman sitting behind a metal desk, piled with papers. He was young, with dark eyes and sleeves rolled to the elbow, a pencil tucked behind his ear. His accent when he spoke was East Coast, precise and fast. "You're Greta Möller?" he asked, glancing at a folder. "Yes, sir," she said, the title still strange on her tongue. He smiled faintly. "No need for sir, we just need some help. You were a nurse, correct?" "Yes." "Good. We've got crates of medical records, most of them in German. My sergeant says you can read that better than we can. You'll be assigned here for the week, sorting and translating." He handed her a chair, and for the first time since her capture, someone offered her a seat before ordering her to sit. She nodded and took it carefully. The room smelled of dust and ink and something else she couldn't place. Coffee. Not the bitter barley mix they brewed in Berlin, but real coffee. The first hour passed in silence. Julius typed on his machine, each keystroke snapping sharp in the quiet. Greta translated medical entries: frostbite, amputation, pneumonia, the ghosts of men she'd treated on wooden tables. Every page smelled faintly of antiseptic and smoke. When she rubbed her eyes, he looked up. "Need a break?" She shook her head. "My glasses," she said quietly. "They broke last year. I fix with wire." Julius frowned. "That's why you're squinting?" "I can still see." He leaned back, studying her face. "Not well enough, I bet." Then without another word, he stood, left the room, and didn't return for almost an hour. Greta sat stiffly, convinced she had said the wrong thing. When the door opened again, he was carrying a small brown case. "Try these," he said, setting it on the desk. Inside, wrapped in tissue, were glasses. Real ones. Thin metal frames, the lenses clean and clear. Greta stared as if he'd placed a live bird in front of her. "I don't understand." "They're yours," he said. "I had a pair made in Austin yesterday. Used your prescription from intake." She blinked hard. "But why?" He shrugged, almost embarrassed. "Can't file paperwork if you can't read it." Her throat tightened. "You paid for them?" "Don't worry about it." He grinned, soft but nervous. "Besides, I got a discount for ordering the same style as mine." Greta's hands trembled as she lifted the glasses from the case. She slid them on, and the world sharpened instantly. The edge of the desk, the typewriter keys, the dust floating in the beam of sunlight through the window. She could see the lines in Julius's face, the way his eyes caught the light. She could see everything. "They fit," he said. She nodded, unable to speak. For a moment, both of them just sat there in the soft clatter of the typewriter and the hum of quiet gratitude. That evening, when she returned to the barracks, Lotta noticed immediately. "New glasses?" she asked, her voice curious but wary. "Yes," Greta said. "From the Americans?" "Yes." Lotta's expression softened. "They're kind, these men." Greta hesitated. "Yes, too kind." Days passed. The office became her new assignment. She translated files while Julius typed requisitions and joked about the endless bureaucracy of his army. Sometimes he brought coffee. Once he handed her a peanut butter sandwich, grinning as though it were an inside joke. "You've never had one?" he asked. She shook her head, eyeing it suspiciously. "It looks strange. Everyone says that the first time." She took a small bite. The texture was thick, sticky, clinging to her mouth like paste. She coughed and reached for water. Julius burst out laughing, the sound startlingly genuine. "I warned you," he said between laughs. "It's awful," she muttered, trying not to smile. "Give it a week. You'll crave it." She didn't. But she ate every bite. And every time he brought one, she pretended she liked it because it mattered that he'd made it for her. Their conversations grew longer. He told her about Brooklyn, about his mother's grocery store, about baseball. She told him about Berlin before the war, about her mother's piano, about a night when the air raid sirens failed and she thought the sky would never stop burning. He listened. No judgment, no correction, just listening. One afternoon, she caught him watching her through the reflection of his typewriter lid. He looked away quickly, typing too fast. Something electric passed between them, the kind of silence that carries more truth than words ever could. That night, Greta lay awake, fingers brushing the new glasses on her nightstand. They were proof of something she didn't have a name for yet, a kindness without condition, a bridge she hadn't believed could exist between two sides of a war. She whispered into the darkness, "Maybe the world can start again." Outside, the Texas night hummed with crickets and wind. Somewhere a radio played a song about love, slow and soft in a language she didn't yet understand. But for the first time she wanted to. Greta began to measure her days by small, honest moments. The office hours unfolded with a rhythm she could trust. Translate a page, pour a cup of coffee, fold a chart, listen while Julius hummed under his breath. He would bring in small things from the base commissary, a newspaper, a strip of chewing gum, once a comic book with a flying man in a blue suit, and leave them on her desk with an easy laugh as if the gesture were nothing at all. She kept the comic hidden under her translation notes and read it at night by flashlight, the colors and impossible heroism, a strange mirror to her own life. The man in the panels chose goodness. That idea lodged in her like a seed. Outside the office, the camp hummed with other small mercies. A veteran woman who'd been coughing for weeks received a proper bottle of medication. An extra blanket appeared at the foot of a bunk without fuss. A guard helped an elderly prisoner mend a torn coat, stitching the fabric by lamplight as if it were a kindness he'd been instructed to perform every night. The cumulative weight of those acts altered the women's calculation of what America might be. It wasn't propaganda or spectacle. It was the sum of routine decency. Greta watched Lotta and Rosea and Hilda as they processed it differently. Lotta softened visibly, her shoulders losing the permanent tension of someone ready to flinch. Rosea collected small facts like contraband, a description of grocery stores, a name of a cereal, a casual detail about factory shifts, that she folded into her chest like a map. Hilda, ever the analyst, didn't cry at the food or the chocolate. She cataloged it, cataloged the prices, the allocations, the absurdity of a nation that could complain about grocery lines while feeding its prisoners with butter. She kept a Hershey wrapper folded in her pocket like an exhibit. Rumors moved fast in the barracks. They said the Jewish corporal who'd bought Greta's glasses had relatives lost in Europe. They said he had once kept notebooks of recipes his mother used to make. The rumor that touched Greta most was simpler. He'd driven to Austin on his day off to fetch the lenses because he thought someone should be able to read their own records. The explanation was practical, but the act felt like something larger. It was the everyday insistence that ordinary humanity could persist, even when maps and flags argued otherwise. Sometimes they spoke of leaving. The conversation would begin at the wash basin in hushed tones. What papers to file, the maze of visas, the possibility of staying if a friend would sponsor you, the improbability of an American soldier choosing a German bride. Greta listened, the idea both intoxicating and terrifying. To remain meant vanishing from everything she had known. To return meant stepping back into rationed streets and stairs. Either choice felt like a betrayal of some version of herself. Julius became the axis around which these decisions turned. He offered practical help. How to write a letter to relatives, what to say in an affidavit, how to find a job that might sponsor a fiancé. He did it as if assisting a colleague, his hands steady as he wrote down names and addresses, copying forms in precise block letters, but his attention wasn't purely bureaucratic. He watched Greta when she laughed at a clumsy comic strip panel or when she winced reading a medical entry. His quiet was never empty. It filled the space in a way that made the barracks quieter and the nights softer. One afternoon, as summer edged toward a Texas fall, Greta walked into the rec room to find a stack of magazines and a small wooden crate of oranges someone had donated. The crate smelled like sunlight. Oranges were a miracle. Citrus had been a tale told only at Christmas markets before the war. She held one, feeling its weight, the pitted skin warm from the sun. A young cook offered a peel, and she accepted it like a sacrament, skin between thumb and forefinger. The tiny burst of oil, the scent, the brightness of the fruit, all of it anchored her to a world that had not been entirely consumed by ideology. The longer she stayed, the more she noticed the subtle rules that governed kindness here. It was offered without strings. It arrived in workmanlike ways, and when it was refused, it was treated with the same reserve as any other preference. There were no lectures. There were practical conversations about feeding a unit, about how to stretch supplies fairly. The face of generosity here was functional and unromantic. It did not seek credit. That aspect more than anything unnerved Greta, because she had always expected life to come with ledgers attached. Hilda's Hershey's locket remained a quiet scandal. She had cut the foil to fit inside a hollowed locket she'd purchased from the camp's lost and found, and wore it at her throat like a relic. When asked, she would say only that she kept it for memory's sake. Privately, she touched it at odd moments and considered all the small economies she had navigated back home. The trades, the favors, the corruption that made a bar of chocolate rarer than a truth. Now she wore a truth. Greta's relationship with Julius developed without fanfare or dramatic confession. It happened in the missed glances and in the way he remembered her favorite coffee strength, and in the way he seemed to instinctively know when she needed a pen or a handkerchief. She found herself looking forward to filing sessions, to his jokes about clumsy typewriters, to the way his brow crinkled when he tried to remember a German word. Once, in a slow, unremarkable moment between pages, he took her hand briefly and uncertain, testing touch, and she felt an ember that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with two people finding a fragile companionship amidst ruin. Not everyone approved. There were whispers from other prisoners, suspicion, accusations, warnings about compromise. The older women advised caution, their voices edged with memory and a kind of hard-earned cynicism. "Be careful with your heart," one of them told Greta one night, voice low as she mended a uniform. "People use love like currency." Greta listened, nodded, but the warning fell against her like a weathered leaf. It did not extinguish the small heating in her chest. At times, the reality of the past intruded sharply. A translation would reveal a name of a town flattened by bombing. A letter would arrive for a woman in the barracks whose family had been scattered. The grief did not soften merely because someone had handed out pancakes or fixed a pair of glasses. It lived beside the new mercies, shadowing them. But the new mercies made room for the old grief to breathe without consuming everything. One morning, a clerk announced that the repatriation lists were being prepared. The room went suddenly quieter than a tomb. Papers rustled like wings. Some women folded their hands and prepared themselves. Others refused to speak of it. Greta felt a tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with hunger. She could return to a ruined city and claim the bones of a life she'd left behind, or she could choose the dangerous, messy alternative to stay, to navigate visas and officers and the scorn of a homeland that might never forgive her. The choice felt like standing on a cliff in fog. When she confided in Julius that night, her voice small, he didn't answer with grand promises. He simply placed a hand on the file he was translating and said, "We'll try. I'll do what I can." It was not a vow. It was a practical plan. The modesty of it moved her more than any speech would have. It fit the world here. Clear, serviceable, true. Greta slept that night with both the glasses and the comic beneath her pillow. She dreamed not of bombs but of breakfast tables set with plates that were always full. She dreamt of a life where her children would not learn the alchemy of scarcity. The thought made her cry softly into the darkness, not in despair but in a kind of cautious gratitude. Across the barracks, someone hummed a tune. It sounded like home, and for the first time in a long while, home felt like a place she might shape, rather than a past she was doomed to relive. The smell of hickory smoke drifted over Camp Swift like a hymn. It was May 1946, and the American Guards had organized a farewell barbecue before the final transport sailed home. Greta stood at the edge of the parade ground, clutching a paper cup of sweet tea, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. The sight before her felt unreal. Long tables sagging under platters of roasted meat, cornbread and bowls of peaches floating in syrup. Children darted between picnic blankets, their laughter echoing through the still Texas air. For the first time since her capture, the camp didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a place trying to remember how to be human. Lotta nudged her. We shouldn't stare. It makes us look hungry, she whispered in German. Greta smiled faintly. We are hungry. For food? Lotta asked. Greta hesitated. For something that lasts. They both went quiet as Sergeant Davis, the same man who had once offered her spaghetti, stood by the grill turning slabs of brisket the size of her arm. The man still moved with an unhurried calm as though the war had never touched him. His laughter rolled through the crowd like warmth itself. Every sound, every scent, the fat sizzling, the gentle twang of a harmonica, felt like the opposite of what war had taught her to expect. Hilda appeared at her side, her expression unreadable. Around her neck hung the small silver locket she never took off, the Hershey's wrapper folded inside. You smell that? She said softly. In Dresden, that smell meant something was burning. Greta nodded. Here it means lunch, Hilda's eyes glistened. Exactly. When the line for food opened, the American families insisted the women go first. Greta took her plate mechanically. Cornbread, baked beans, slices of beef glazed in something sweet. She sat with Lotta and Hilda at a long wooden bench, too overwhelmed to speak. Across the field, Julia stood near the punch bowl, sleeves rolled up, laughing at something a young lieutenant said. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment it was as if the rest of the camp disappeared. He gave her a small nod, the kind that meant you're all right. She nodded back, though her throat felt tight. Eat, Lotta urged, breaking the silence. Greta picked up her fork. The first bite of brisket melted on her tongue, smoky, rich, impossible. Her vision blurred for a moment, and she set the fork down quickly, breathing hard. They feed us better at farewell than we fed our wounded, she whispered. Then the microphone cracked to life. A young American private tried to make a speech, something about rebuilding, about forgiveness, but his words floated above everyone's heads like faint music. The real noise was quieter, the scrape of forks, the murmur of women translating unfamiliar English words, the clink of glass bottles sweating in the sun, and then Roswitha stood up. She was the youngest of them, a radar operator barely 22, with hair the color of wheat and a stubborn chin that had once terrified new recruits. She clutched an empty Coca-Cola bottle in her hands like it was a relic. We come here, she began, her accent thick but her voice steady, thinking America was weak, lazy, no discipline. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Hilda muttered under her breath, Oh no. Roswitha lifted the bottle higher. We are taught you fight with machines, not courage, that you win only by luck. But we see now, she gestured toward the feast, toward the children running barefoot, you win because you have enough to feed everyone. You build so much you can waste it. You call that normal. A nervous ripple ran through the crowd. The Americans didn't know whether to laugh or listen. Julius froze near the punch bowl, his eyes locked on Greta. We thought victory meant strength, Roswitha continued, her voice breaking now. But it means abundance. It means kindness. You win before the first shot because you never have to choose between bread and bullets. Her knuckles whitened around the glass bottle. We are wrong about everything. The silence that followed was so deep it hurt. The American guards shifted uncomfortably. Sergeant Davis looked at the captain, unsure whether to intervene. Then quietly but unmistakably Greta stood. Her knees shook, but she kept her chin high. The sun caught the lenses of her glasses, Julius's glasses, and they flashed like small mirrors. I also have something to say, she said. Her voice trembled, but it carried. Every eye turned to her. I was taught people like Corporal Julius Winterman were not human. A collective murmur swept through the German women, that he was an enemy to be erased. But he gave me these. She touched the frames gently. He paid for them himself. Because he said war is over, and I should be able to see. Someone gasped. Greta's hands shook, but she continued. I was a nurse in Stalingrad. I watched men die while we rationed bandages and lied to ourselves that it meant something. But here, she gestured toward the Americans, toward the endless food. A man I was told to hate gave me sight. Another gave me spaghetti. Another gave me chocolate. You call this country soft. I call it stronger than anything we ever built. Julius's face was pale, his eyes glassy. Greta felt tears rising, hot and unstoppable. I will not go back to a country that teaches hate. I will stay here if they let me. And if Julius asks, I will marry him. A hush fell so deep that even the flies seemed to stop buzzing. For 10 seconds, no one breathed. Then Sergeant Davis began to clap, slow, firm. The sound echoed like a drum. A white guard joined him. Then a woman from the mess tent. Then the captain. Within moments, the entire parade ground roared with applause. Greta stood frozen as Julius walked through the crowd toward her. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes held steady. He stopped just in front of her, a safe distance still, the air between them heavy with everything unspoken. "You mean that?" he asked softly. She nodded, tears streaming freely now. "Every word." He exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and disbelief, and for a moment, the noise around them blurred into one vast tender roar. Hilda stood too, tears on her face for the first time anyone had seen. She didn't clap, just watched, her hand resting on her locket as though blessing it. Roswitha held her Coke bottle high, the glass glinting in the Texas sun. The other women wept openly, their sobs mixing with laughter and the rhythmic thunder of hands against hands. The barbecue dissolved into chaos after that, people hugging, talking, crying, offering congratulations in languages that barely crossed, but for Greta, the rest of the day passed like a fever dream. Julia stayed beside her, silent but smiling. When the sun finally dipped low, painting the camp gold, he handed her a plate piled with hash browns and said quietly, "For breakfast tomorrow." "To start new," she laughed through her tears. "I'll try not to think it's burned straw." He grinned. "Promise?" "Promise." They ate standing side by side, the air thick with wood smoke and possibility. Around them, a war ended one meal at a time. The Americans said, "Try Hashbrowns and Omelette." Female German POWs thought it was burned straw. Camp Swift began to empty. One transport at a time, the German women boarded trucks that rumbled down the dirt road toward the rail line. The war had ended a year ago, but the echo of it still clung to their clothes, to the way they folded their hands when they spoke to guards, to the way they hesitated before accepting kindness. Each departure was a quiet ceremony, no flags, no speeches. Just the shuffle of boots, the rattle of luggage, the soft thud of suitcases being lifted into the backs of trucks. Greta stood near the fence line that morning, the sun rising pink and soft over the Texas fields. She wore her gray dress still, but it hung loose now, the result of steady meals and sleep. Her glasses caught the dawn light, twin circles of gold reflection. Julius stood beside her, hands tucked into his pockets, the brim of his cap shading his eyes. Neither spoke for a long time. "You don't have to stay here," he said finally. She smiled faintly. "But I don't want to leave." He studied her face. "It won't be easy." "It hasn't been easy since 1939, she said. He laughed under his breath, a quiet sound, and nodded. "You're right." That afternoon, Greta helped Lotta pack. The barracks smelled of soap and paper and faintly of the barbecue that had fed them into tears. Lotta folded each dress carefully, smoothing the seams. "They say we'll be sent to Bremerhaven first," she said. "Then processed, then home. Whatever home means now. Are you afraid?" Greta asked. Lotta shrugged. "Yes, but I want to see my mother. Even if it's only rubble where our house was." Greta nodded. "I hope she's there." When the trucks arrived, Greta and Julia stood at the edge of the field. Lotta waved from the back, her hair whipping in the warm wind. "Write to me," she shouted. "I will," Greta called back, though she knew there might be no address to send to. Hilda left next, heading for Nuremberg. Her locket glimmered in the sun as she climbed aboard the transport, the Hershey's wrapper inside pressed against her skin. She didn't cry. She never did. But she held Greta's gaze for a long moment before she turned away. That for Hilda was enough. Roswitha was the last of their circle to go. She carried her Coca-Cola bottle wrapped in a handkerchief like a sacred thing. Before stepping onto the truck, she turned back and pressed it into Greta's hands. "Keep this," she said softly. "For luck," Greta frowned. "But it's yours." Roswitha smiled. "You'll need it more." Then she laughed light and free. "Besides, in America there are millions more." When the final truck pulled away, the dust lingered in the air like memory. Greta stood alone in the quiet campyard, clutching the glass bottle, watching until the road swallowed them. The paperwork took weeks. Julius filled it out with patient precision, every line a bridge between two worlds. He called it the fiancé visa. The term felt unreal in Greta's mouth. They'll ask questions, he said, but your record's clean. You were a nurse, not a soldier. That matters. And your family? She asked. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. They're gone. Poland, 1943. She touched his arm gently. I'm sorry. He shook his head. You didn't do it. When approval finally came, it was June 20th, 1946. The same day the camp's mess hall closed for good. Sergeant Davis shook Julius's hand at the gate and told Greta, You take care of this one. He's a good man, she smiled. He is. They married 3 months later in Brooklyn City Hall. No family attended. Just a handful of Julius's colleagues, a borrowed dress, and a small bouquet of white flowers from the market. The judge asked the question, and Greta said yes in a voice that trembled but did not break. When the ceremony ended, Julius kissed her forehead and whispered, Welcome home. Their home was a narrow brownstone in Flatbush with creaking stairs and a small kitchen that always smelled of coffee. Julius worked as an accountant. Greta took night classes in English and eventually became a school nurse. She never stopped rolling her R's when she spoke, and she never stopped crying when she cooked spaghetti. Every December 12th, the anniversary of her first real meal at Camp Swift, she made meatballs and hash browns for dinner. 4 meatballs per person. Always 4. Always too much food for 2 people, but she said it felt wrong to make less. On those nights, Julius would watch her quietly from the table. She would taste the sauce, wipe her eyes with the corner of her apron, and whisper, They fed us like this once. He never asked her to explain. He didn't need to. Time moved the way it always does, steadily, indifferently. The camp became a community center. The parade ground turned into a parking lot. The mess hall stayed, but its walls were painted bright yellow, and its windows filled with laughter instead of fear. After Julius died in 1988, Greta lived another 15 years in the same brownstone. Her children, Michael, Sarah, and Rebecca, spoke English without a trace of accent and couldn't quite understand why their mother kept a glass Coke bottle on the windowsill, or why every December she cried while cooking. When she passed away in 2003 at the age of 86, they found her old trunk full of neatly folded letters, a small Hershey's wrapper pressed inside a Bible, and a pair of glasses wrapped in cloth. Her eldest daughter, cleaning the house months later, found the recipe for Hashbrowns and Omelette, written in shaky German on yellowed paper. At the bottom, in neat English, Greta had written, They called it breakfast. We called it mercy. Today, Camp Swift's mess hall still stands in Bastrop, Texas. Locals use it for weddings, bake sales, and Christmas dinners. Few remember the prisoners who once filled its benches, the women who wept over spaghetti or hash browns, who saw the world change one plate at a time. But sometimes, when the lights dim and the scent of butter and salt fills the air, someone swears they can feel something there. The quiet gratitude of people learning that kindness can taste like food. If you ever walk through those doors, look for the old photo hanging near the kitchen. A group of women in faded uniforms smiling awkwardly beside a black cook and a young corporal with tired eyes. In the center stands a woman with round glasses and a crooked grin, holding a fork above a plate of breakfast potatoes. That's Greta. That's what forgiveness looks like when it finally learns how to eat.